Okay. Hey guys, it's been a while. While I've been gone in this 1 year hiatus, I've been doing a lot of the education stuff, more of the giving, not the receiving, because I'm a giver. I've been doing presentations on Career Day, a photography class at a local high school. Not only that, but I've been hosting my own photography workshop. Been working with a lot of people who are learning. I get a lot of questions, of course. One of the big questions is, where do I go from here? Basically, you have a person who has a camera, kit lens, they've learned that they love photography, but they don't really know where to go from there. That's why I'm making this video. These are 4 of my top recommendations for your first investments as a new photographer. Items or equipment that are not only inexpensive, but are going to enable you to do more and discover and explore different realms of photography that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do without them. Anything that you see here in this video is linked in the description down below. I try to include different options, really cheap versions to the ones that I use. The first thing that I recommend above anything else, which is something you've likely heard of before, and that is the Nifty 50 lens. This is by far my highest recommendation for your first lens. Not only is it cheap, inexpensive, relatively of course, the Canon one goes for about $125. Sony's, I think theirs goes for about $200, and the Nikon, I think last I checked, was about $250. I'm not entirely sure on that. Of course, I'll leave the links down below so you can check on that. Not only is it inexpensive, but it's unique in that this will likely be your first prime lens. A prime lens is a lens with a fixed focal length, which means you can't zoom in and out. It is 50 millimeters all the way through, doesn't change. So if you want to change your frame in any way whatsoever, if you want to fill the frame more or fit more in your frame, you're going to have to move yourself. This is going to be a good learning tool for you because a lot of new photographers get in the habit of just relying on zoom to compose their shot, and that results in some distortion issues that a lot of new photographers don't quite notice in the beginning. Another important feature of this is that it is a wide aperture, which means that you're going to gather a lot more light, so it works better in low light settings, but also you're going to get a lot more separation, because what that large aperture does is creates a gorgeous shallow depth of field. So when you focus in on your subject, everything behind it is going to be very blurry, everything in front of it's going to be blurry as well. And because it's a prime lens, generally speaking, prime lenses are far more sharper than their zoom lens counterparts, for the reason that prime lenses have less glass elements in them. I wouldn't say that the 50 millimeter is the sharpest lens out there, definitely not, but it's most likely a lot sharper than the lens that you're using right now, depending on if you have an L series kit lens or something less than that. The second thing that I recommend, and this is going to come off as it's kind of obvious to a lot of people, but the reason why I bring it up because it wasn't quite obvious to me. I thought it was something that I'd never need because I was going into portrait photography. I never thought I'd need it, but having it enabled me to try different realms of photography, and that is a tripod. Yes, most of you probably have a tripod. Some of you don't and think you don't need it, but let me tell you, a tripod is extremely important. You can't do trick photography. You can't do long exposure. Landscapes require a tripod most of the time. Much of product photography is going to require your camera to be in a fixed position. Having that tripod and being able to create these shots really kind of opened the door of creativity for me and allowed me to explore these different realms. And I have to say, like, some of my favorite shots have been from a tripod. And this is coming from someone who thought they would never use a tripod and just totally did not like tripods. Now, there's a lot of cheap and a lot of expensive tripods out there. Again, I'm gonna go ahead, put links down of what I think are good recommendations, both on the really cheap side and then also on what I just personally recommend is good value. My third recommendation is actually going to be a somewhat accessory to a tripod, and that's going to be a trigger. I tried to do without it and I realized, like, damn, this is extremely frustrating. I should have listened to those videos that I watched on YouTube explaining to me how to do this that recommended that I get a trigger. I did not heed their advice, and I got on location and I shot my shots only to find motion blur in my long exposures, which is extremely annoying because I wasted a trip essentially. All could have been rectified with a little $15 trigger off of Amazon. What this enables you to do is not only to obviously press the trigger without having to move or jitter your camera, but most of these are going to have a hold feature. So if you are trying to manually hold your exposure on your camera, or manually drag the shutter, getting a long exposure shot, whether that be just holding it to whatever you feel is right, or doing it past bulb meaning past 30 seconds, and where your camera usually just requires you to hold the button down to go further than that. This is definitely ideal. So what you're going to be able to do is just press the button. If you want to just press the shutter button just like you normally would, take a single shot, or just press it, push up, and then it holds it right there, and even has a little colored indicator to show you when it's being held down. So without a doubt, you want to be able to get certain shots without this. The input for the trigger does matter, so make sure to check which one your camera requires. My last recommendation is going to be somewhere, it's going to be a bit more on the complicated, more complex side of photography, but it's going to be, it's a pretty powerful tool. So photography is essentially just capturing light. Your camera is a light sensor, and your lens is essentially a light funnel. All you're doing when you're changing settings is changing the way the sensor interprets the light, or changing the way the lens funnels in light. You can also directly manipulate the light in front of the camera. The only way you can do that is with light modifiers and a flash. Flash photography is something that I got into a couple years into my hobby / career of photography, and it was mostly just because I was reluctant to get into it, because it was adding a complicated element to my photography and my technique. There is an additional learning curve when it comes to working with flash, but there's a lot of gain you get from it. You can dramatically change an image with just a single flash, even if you're outside, because most flashes that you can pick up for cheap is not going to overpower the sun, but if you're using it in a specific way, you could really make a photo far more interesting than it would be without a flash. If you're working indoors, it's going to be the difference between a usable photo and a not usable photo. Right there. Right there. Right there. It's also fun to annoy, children, when you're walking around and they're all looking at you and stop staring at me. Usually they stop after that. It's going to be a little bit of an investment. I think you're going to be dropping $70 you can drop in the minimum for something that actually works. You won't be getting TTL, which is the flash version of auto mode. It's going to be manually set the power levels. And I personally recommend that. I don't really use TTL, even though I have that feature on my flashes. But being able to directly manipulate it, experiment with the shots, is going to be a big, it's going to be a big help and a big boost to your creative ability when capturing photos. I highly recommend picking up some cheap triggers just to get started. I have these are not particularly cheap. I say they're about mid-range when it comes to price, the Yongnuo ones. I've relied on them pretty for a lot, usually for weddings, and they work really well. And but there's a lot cheaper ones out there. I've noticed that the really cheap ones, like $20 ones, they don't last long, but I think that's fine for your first investment. So those are my top 4 recommendations for first-time investments for new photographers. Be sure to follow me on Instagram. I'm currently juggling a few different accounts, so I'll just throw them down in there depending on what you're interested in. Take a look, follow me on Instagram, subscribe, like, comment. If you have any questions on any of the pieces of equipment that I've used, be sure to let me know down below, and I'll try really, 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 really hard to respond. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye!